Hello there, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Strife's Talking Points. And today I'm going to cover the House Judiciary Subcommittee hearing on slavery reparations. Pretty sure this is going to be a big topic in the news over the next few days. I've watched quite a bit of this a few times, and I want to focus in on my thoughts, my opinion, and some other information provided. There is Mr. Cohen, the Democratic congressman from Tennessee. And he's getting ready to ask a question of Reverend Sutton of Maryland. And towards the end of this video, I'm also going to go through the National African American Reparations Commission, their preliminary reparations program, which they've outlined a 10-point program. And that's what a lot of this comes from, what we're seeing in this. I'm going to go through some of that with you all, so please stay through to the end. Or scroll across, skip to the end, and see what's going on there. So we begin.
Let me ask you, you heard Mr. Hughes' testimony and said he didn't want reparations.
Yes.
Do you believe, and this would be a study of reparations, H.R. 40 draws no conclusions, it would be a study. Do you believe that there should be exclusions for wealthy folks who have been successful and maybe emphasize deeds and works and actions that help the people who have not achieved as much and lift them up?
I believe that one of the reasons why it was so widely accepted in my diocese is
But I apologize. The C-SPAN video freezes quite a bit.
I believe one of the reasons why the vote for reparations was so widely accepted in my diocese is because we separated it from black descendants of slaves getting checks. We're talking about funding initiatives, programs, addressing issues such as mass incarceration. And when that's explained to people that that's a reparation, that's repairing something that can be traced to slavery, then that is the case. Personally, I'm not looking for a check from the federal government or from my church or anything. I'm concerned about those who have been left behind, the masses of African American descendants of slaves who are mired in hopelessness and despair in communities of crime, violence, poverty, and racism.
Now, right there, the point he's making to me sounds more or less like a very good thing. The whole idea about that I'm getting from a lot of this is overall, as far as reparations go, is trying to tackle what's actually happening. Now, of course, there will be people that are much further right than me who will say this is basically just a way to try and get more government spending going, or I've actually heard it from people all over the place who are saying this is again a new version of welfare coming forward. Overall, though, what he's talking about, not directly funding people, not giving him or any of the people that direct monetary gain themselves for being the descendants of slaves, more or less trying to go into the different social economic programs and trying to push people forward.
And so I think if we can at least have a civil, good conversation on the concept of reparations, then talk about money. Because the moment you start talking about money, the idea, especially among many white persons, I'm going to give a check to black persons, what about me? The moment you begin...
That, I will go ahead and admit that I'm a white person. And one of the key arguments that I know of, that I hear, that I've thought of, is if you directly take money from, let's say, one group of people and give it to another group of people, is it unlike that it's actually taxation, where you take the money and you give it to other people? But when it's thought of as reparations, that means because I'm white or Hispanic or Asian or whatever, that I should then be taxed, especially to give it to a particular race. And there is a lot of pushback on that, because the basic argument is no person alive today owned slaves, Well, at least not any of the U.S. citizens. I mean, there are still slave markets in the world. There's still slavery, but the general vast amount of the U.S. population never owned a slave and never was a slave. And he kind of speaks to this a little bit more.
Begin with money, then the resistance goes up. Let's talk about the concept.
And again, the video does freeze quite a bit on C-SPAN.
Finally, in relation to your question, we have a problem in this nation of being able to talk civilly about race. And when I'm talking for reparations, I'm talking about those left behind, but I'm actually talking to my white brothers and sisters. You need this more than we do.
Now, I found that very strange. There's a study, and I've seen it. I've tried to find it to add to this, where it's called in-group, out-group bias. If you take a group of blacks or Asians or Hispanics or whatever group of people, typically there is an in-group bias, meaning you think better of people in your group than people out of your group. And generally it ranges quite a bit positive. So if you're a Black American, you would see other blacks as positive overall in general. Same thing with Asians. However, in the group of what you call the white liberal, these more far left group of people, they have a very negative thought pattern of themselves. They're almost, I believe it was minus 10 or 10 to 15. I'm sorry, I do not have the study, but where they thought of themselves and other white people negatively, which is unique in the country because no other group thinks that way. And those may be the people that the Reverend Eugene Taylor Sutton here is speaking about, where they have this negative view of themselves and they themselves would need this. Now, I don't know how that would help them because no other group of white people or other race or ethnicity has that type of view of themselves. And this is kind of more to the polarization politically that we've had in the country in the last few years. There's this very set group of people who truly dislike themselves because of the color of their skin. And it's something that is really pushing forward these conversations when I don't know how the conversation would work, but having a negative feeling about yourself because of the skin of your color is very strange.
You need this for your soul. You need this to be able to look Black persons in the eye and say, I acknowledge the mistake, and I want to be part of the solution to repair that damage.
Now, I cannot imagine walking up to a Black person or any person, say, I acknowledge the mistake. This is the extreme progressivism, this extreme group of people who don't like themselves. And unfortunately, because they hold these views, are more or less the racist in the community. These people who believe they are so far above another group of people because of the color of their skin. I would never even think to walk up to someone and say that. And good for my soul, I don't even understand what that means because, again, that's not how normal people think. That's not a majority idea. That's this extreme left liberal position where they feel bad about who they are.
Thank you, Reverend Sutton. And as Reverend Sutton speaks to the soul, Dr. Malvo, you speak to the economics.
And if you do watch this and you want to skip through, of all the people there, Reverend Sutton is one of the, I preferred his part to Danny Glover and the other gentleman there, and even the economist here, which we are going to cover part of hers really quickly, and then I'm going to switch over to the NRAAC document as both Danny Glover and the economist you're getting ready here speak are part of that group. And I'm going to walk through some of that as well. Not sure how well this video will do, because this is one of those topics that is really on the more polarizing edge of our society.
And if some of this,
Again, the video freezes. There's not a lot I can do about it.
efforts to remediate the past, as Dr. Ogletree had spoken about, massive influx of monies for health and education and job training, if some of that went into areas where there are large concentrations of descendants of slaves that have not succeeded for a myriad of reasons, and if some of that went to white folks who were there who also are living in bad conditions, would that be a problem, do you think, Dr. Malbo, or would that just be helping everybody that's in a miasma?
Now, I think what I got from that and what I took from it is that he's saying, if we just go after whole communities, whole areas. So if you take, let's say, the poor area of Chicago, and you just started pouring in money and resources, sort of not just being racially specific, but actually just regionally specific. So this area of the town, these 20 blocks or whatever, are exceedingly poor, and just poured money and resources into those to bring them out, would that be okay?
Chairman Cohen, it's really interesting that right this minute, as we're having this hearing, Reverend William Barber is having a hearing on poverty. So this is a great day for economic justice issues. Poverty is a problem in our nation, but you can't fix poverty, nor can you fix inequality unless you deal with racism.
So her answer is no. Poverty and inequality, even though if you run the numbers, there is a large, in the black community, there is a much larger portion of the black demographic in the U.S. that are living in poverty. However, there are many, many more white people in poverty, as we represent a much larger group in society. That's factually true, statistically true, that you will see a larger percentage of blacks in the population, or poor in the population, where there's a much larger number of poor white people than there are poor black people. But again, that's not what this is about. This is strictly about the slavery reparations.
And dealing with racism is about dealing with reparations. I'm with the Reverend here, and I don't care
Again, apologies for the video freezing.
about
100 meg
a personal
internet.
check made out to Julianne Malvo or anybody else. But how about we fully fund our historically black colleges and universities? How about...
Now, I didn't know there was a funding issue at national black colleges and universities. Please help me in the comments if you do know something about that. I wonder if that just is a reference to the whole idea of free college, free education for people, or if that is more disrepair. I tried to find anything out about that, and I couldn't find anything, so I have to assume it's basically like the free college idea.
Once upon a time, Brother Chairman, we had more than 100 black-owned banks. Now we have 23. How come? Again, the devil is busy. Pernicious legislation that basically caused people to lose banks, changing in reserve requirements and things like that. Gentrification.
Now, changing in reserve requirements happened throughout history, and it did cause a lot of banks to go out, because it used to be you could basically create a certain amount of money, and then over time reserve limits were put in because of the overall banking issues we've had historically in the U.S. There's been multiple bank crashes, runs on banks, and the Federal Reserve System was set up so that you would have X dollars to keep banks from failing. And even in the last decade, in the last 20 years, you've had banks fail. Banks have become insolvent, and they've had to be bought and basically taken over by other larger banks, as is the truth of all of America right now. Is the larger corporations, the larger fish, are eating the small fish.
While you have empty swaths of land all over our nation, why now?
Now, the empty swaths of land, that will come up in the... And remember, she is one of the people who's helped write the plan we'll go over at the very end. and she's referring to empty swaths of land. This is public land that she's referring to.
Deal with that. So I respect your question about
Again, 100 meg internet, this is what I get.
areas, but I think that really does speak to our dis-ease, our uneasiness in talking straight up front about race. Race is our nation's second original sin. The first was what we did to Native people. Okay.
Now, this is interesting because this whole idea of reparations, of going back, 50, 100 years, 150 years to have a discussion on reparations in the modern era. So pretty well everyone from there is now gone, and she's saying that the conversation should be held on reparations as the second sin of the country, where the first sin is the treatment of natives. And one of the things I thought of when I heard her say that is, well, we're having the reparations conversation now. The next big thing will be Native people moving forward. And then, who knows where it goes from there, because as you go back in history to find more and more grievance issues to talk about, where does it stop?
Okay, but racism, enslavement was our original sin, and we got to deal with reparations by dealing exactly with that. If we want to have an American Marshall Plan that deals with all poor people, Reverend Barber says there are 140 million poor people, 43% of our nation. Let's deal with that, but let's not forget that race is central to anything we do around economic justice.
Now, economic justice, that is something that I hear, and there's no two groups of people, no two families, no ethnic groups, no two groups are equal in how they interact in the country. There are clips, there are all kinds of statistical data that shows this isn't true. There's anecdotal data where you'll take certain groups of immigrants coming from various countries, and when they come into the U.S., some will do better, some will do worse. Especially like the Asian community comes to the U.S. and they do extremely well. These are Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, they do extremely well. However, there's smaller groups where there'll be Filipinos and Vietnamese, Cambodians. They will come to the U.S. and they will not do as well. And that's just how it works. So you can't take particular race and expect them to come out equal. It doesn't happen.
Thank you, Doctor. My time expired, and I recognize the ranking member, Mr. Johnson, for 5 minutes.
Now, I'm going to pause this conversation right there as, of course, you go from the Democrat to the Republican, so the Republican switches to his two main speakers or his speakers and goes from there. The National African American Reparations Commission, Preliminary Reparations Program. Earlier in the C-SPAN, you will hear them refer to this. She refers to it. Danny Glover is one of the people out promoting it. This is something that's going on. And I'm going to skip down to the points, and I'm only going to cover 2 or 3 of these points just to get them out there. I highly recommend you go to the ibw21.org, and it's over to the right side. There's a little thing there which talks about reparations, and click on it and read through this yourself. Black, white, whatever. This is kind of what you would assume kind of how legislature goes. Legislature would be written, because a lot of this does come from outside groups where they're telling you what they want, and then a lot of senators and congressmen just kind of copy paste these laws. 1, a formal apology and establishment of a MAAFA African Holocaust Institute. Point A, we demand a formal apology for the role the United States government played by explicitly and implicitly participating in, encouraging, and sanctioning the European slave trade and the institution of chattel slavery, which is what we would consider the institutionalized slavery that the U.S. had. The apology should be initiated by the President and ratified by the U.S. Congress by roll call vote. Again, I don't know. I believe they've already had Congress has already enacted explicit apologies for slavery and the effects thereof. However, they're wanting this African Holocaust Institute. Furthermore, the apology should be accompanied by the establishment of a permanent MAAFA, African Holocaust Institute, charged with providing public education on the origins of enslavement, the role of private and public institutions in initiating and sustaining it, the system of legal and de facto segregation enacted post-emancipation, that's after the Civil War, referring to Jim Crow and a myriad of other laws that have been passed in the country which were directly harmful to African Americans or blacks, to present to the present. The damages / harm inflicted on people individually and collectively, and the wealth and benefits to local, state, and federal government, private institutions, and white society in general. I don't know that they would need to say white society. They could just say American society in general, because one of the arguments that if you watch the full video, you do see they discuss how slavery really, was a burgeoning industry for the U.S. and how the use of slave labor helped push the American economy along, especially in the early days. I mean, we all need to understand that. Derived from the white supremacist institutions and structurally racist policies and practices. Again, I think they should just replace it with American, but that's just me. Because whenever you start to demonize your history, rewrite history, that is one of the most negative things a group or a culture can do to themselves. Because once you start demonizing your history, then the pushback comes against that, because most people would think American history is pretty good. We have some dark days, but overall, we've done kind of a lot for ourselves. The right of reparation and creation of an African knowledge program. The descendants of millions of Africans who were stolen from Africa and transported to the strange lands of the Americas against their will to enrich their captors have a right to return to the motherland of African, to the motherland, to an African nation of their choice. Africans in America who choose to exercise the right to return will be provided with sufficient monetary resources to become productive citizens in their new home, and shall be aided in their resettlement by a black-controlled agency funded by the federal government to perform this function. I find that one there to be the most unique thing here, is basically if a black person from wherever wants to return to Africa, the U.S. would then, I don't know how to repatriate them into another country. Let's say you're, let's just pick Congo. Let's say the Democratic Republic of Congo. Let's say that there's a group of a few dozen, a few hundred, a few thousand, or one guy, person who wants to go to the Congo and set up his life there. That the U.S. would then enforce push the migration of this person to that country, resettle them there, and would they then be considered expatriated? Would they then no longer be a citizen of the U.S.? Would the U.S. have to force the nation to accept them as a citizen, or how would that work? A lot of questions on that one. Here is one that the final one here, the part 3 that I'm going to cover. After that, I'm going to let it go. Right to land for social and economic development. After centuries of free labor that fueled the commercial and industrial revolutions in the U.S., enriched those lands at the helm of capital and finance, and created opportunities and a sense of privilege for Europeans from every socioeconomic strata enslaved Africans were emancipated without being granted a material stake in the form of land resources, e.g., 40 acres and a mule. Now I'm going to skip down from that because, like I said, go read this yourself. And I'm just going to do point A. Substantial tracts of government/public land in the South and other regions of the country be transferred to the National Reparations Trust Authority with full autonomy in terms equivalent to the sovereignty granted to the native people over reservations awarded to them. These lands are to be utilized for major economical, commercial, or educational, commercial, industrial, economic, business, and health wellness institutions as enterprises to the benefit people of African descent. From that, I don't believe they're actually wanting the U.S. to set up a what would amount to a black nation in the U.S. I think they're just wanting control over public land so that they can then develop that land, sell that land, utilize that land as a group. And one of the confusing parts to me about a lot of this is the group itself. Who decides what is best for that group? Would you push it over to a certain class of person? Would it be the blacks, the African Americans who have been successful, who are the privileged group there, that are allowed to make the decisions and to essentially decide who gets the money, how that money is then spent? Or would it be more of a we vote for such and so forth? I find this to be very interesting. It's very different of a discussion we're having in the U.S. right now, and I would like your thoughts on it. Please go to cspan.org, watch this video. Please go to the ibw21.org and read this plan, preliminary reparations program. Like I said, it's all, you go to the main page, it's over to the right. This is, I believe that this topic is going to dominate discourse. I think this should be one of those things we do bring out, we do talk about, we do see where people want to go and figure this out. Anyway, those are just my thoughts, my opinions. I'm not sure how the reparations program would work overall, but like I said, this is the 10-point plan. Please let me know what you think. Like, share, subscribe. Have a great day.